Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we are discussing Severance Season 2 Episode 1, and this series starts off exactly where we left off. If you recall the season finale, which feels like ages ago, the innies managed to resurface to the real world. Now, we don't really know what the effects of this were on the outside because the first episode of Season 2 takes place at Lumen with the innies. After screaming, "She's alive," Mark finds himself right back at Lumen, except this time he's totally alone. I love the temporary new hires in this episode. Like, these people had no chemistry with one another. Mark's time on the surface completely altered his brain chemistry, especially finding out that his Audi's wife works at Lumen, and we're starting to see that some of Mark's memories are starting to spill over to his innie. As soon as he returns to Lumen, he immediately tries to find Miss Casey, but the wellness room as well as Miss Casey are long gone. The revelation regarding Miss Casey was mind-blowing because there was absolutely nothing to suggest that these two people were familiar with each other or knew each other. We know from the previous season that Miss Cobell watched Mark like a hawk. However, he just never remembered. Like, she was hoping that something would trigger his memory, but nothing ever did. Now, in Season 1, the only character we get to know deeply is Mark. And from what we see, his wife's death left him totally detached and withdrawn. And as a result, it makes sense that Mark's innie would really have no feelings towards Miss Casey because Mark's Audi has done his best to avoid thinking about his dead wife. When Mark returns to work, he finds that everything that he once knew is gone. To make matters worse, we find out that Mr. Milchick is in charge. And I think Mr. Milchick is such a fantastic character. He is the corporate sellout we all despise. He is one of those individuals who has given his whole life to a corporation that could honestly care less about him. Since we have no knowledge of the outside world, we don't really know if anything Mr. Milchick is saying is true. In an attempt to make Mark more comfortable, Mr. Milchick informs him that he is famous, and his antics have actually inspired Lumen to make changes for the better. And the story that Mr. Milchick provides is so ridiculous that it could maybe be true. Now, the idea that Miss Cobell was obsessed with Mark is not a stretch of the imagination, and Mark's interactions with Miss Cobell, I mean, it is plausible that she was obsessed with him, but certainly not in the way Mr. Milchick is describing. Now, as much as Mark wants to believe his new boss, the math ain't mathin'. If Lumen really wanted to change for the better, where's his team? I think Mr. Milchick underestimates how much control he has and can keep over Mark. In order to help Mark get used to this new environment, he maintains his position as office manager. Mr. Milchick, I think, even informs the other workers of Mark's time on the outside. And you can see the other workers are really inspired and in awe. They really want to know what the outside world is like. However, despite their interest, despite their respect for him, Mark doesn't care about any of these people. He's like, I want my team back, and he tries to sabotage everyone. And we don't really find out much about these new hires. We don't really need to know that much about them. However, from what we gather of the older Mark, not every team was like the younger Marks. Another new addition to the cast, which I thought was pretty creepy, was Miss Wong. I know it's silly to ask, but why is she a kid? Like, I thought that line of her saying, "because of when I was born," like, just cracked me up because I have so many questions. Is she severed? Is she not severed? Like, what is she doing there? Eventually, Mark is able to send an SOS to the board, this mysterious board that we know nothing about, and magically his team reappears. And I love the way Mr. Milchick constantly tries to gaslight Mark. I think he said something along the lines of how his Audi's fame is getting to his innie's head. Like, this show is so well written. Now that Mark's team is back, Mark is even more paranoid, because if Lumen had the power to bring them back, why did they take them away in the first place? It also makes no sense why Lumen would retain them as employees. Like it would make more sense for Lumen to just terminate all 4 employees and just put this whole mess behind them. I thought the scene of Mark's team reuniting was very sweet because I missed them. Since the innies have no real concept of time, it's hard for us to understand whether or not it's been 5 months, 1 year, 10 years. Like, we don't really know how much time it's been. And like Mark, they only remember the season finale. Now that they're back, the question is, how on earth are they supposed to exist here? In order to help them climatize to the office again, Mr. Milchick has to really walk a fine line, because he has to give them a false sense of security, and he also has to find a way to divide and conquer in order to build a foundation where he is not overthrown like his predecessor, Miss Cobell. Now, we don't really know what Mr. Milchick thinks about Miss Cobell's departure. We know that he's triggered when he sees her name on his welcome screen, and it's hard to know if he just wants to forget her or if he feels bad about what went down. Like, he just seems to be battling with himself. Like, he has a chip on his shoulder and he has a lot to prove. And again, he has to walk this tight line. He can't impose on the innies, and so he has to find a way to emotionally manipulate them. One way to do this is to try and disarm them completely. I thought the blue balloons was a nice touch. It added color to this soulless space. I like the painting we saw when his team was coming out of the elevator of Lumen trying to memorialize this revolution, and more importantly, of the company forgiving them. The break room no longer feels like this torture chamber. It actually weirdly feels like a break room. The chairs look comfortable. The lighting was super nice. During their orientation session, they watched this fantastic video. In the video, Lumen uses audio recordings from the severed floor to tell the story of their revolution and how it changed Lumen for the better. Milchick wants them to believe that Lumen actually thanks them for their insubordination. The video lists a series of meaningless reforms in a fun and entertaining manner. It also reveals information such as the kiss that other members of the team were unaware of. After the video, Mr. Milchick informs them that things have truly changed. There are no more cameras, and he basically just gives them a spiel about, if you really want to do this, we're here to support you. If you feel you don't trust us, you can go. He gives them the illusion of freedom and then leaves them alone in order to decide their fate. In the break room, the innies finally have a chance to compare notes. Mark starts and he spills his guts out. He tells them everything regarding Miss Cobell, regarding his Audi's dead wife. Like, he doesn't leave out a single detail from what I could tell. Now, Helly, on the other hand, was the opposite. She lied through her teeth. And there was a minute where I felt like this was maybe Helly's Audi and not her innie. However, at the same time, it is possible she lied because she feels ashamed. One of the most heartbreaking moments in the last season is when we watch Helly come to the realization that she is responsible for her team's suffering. Helly is the company. She is responsible for maintaining this hellhole. And I'm thinking that maybe this shame is why she concealed this information, but there was something definitely off about her. One of my favorite moments this episode is when she tells Mark that the innies and Audis are not the same and we don't owe them anything. And then she tells him that she will do anything she can to help him. And it's hard to know what's going on with Helly, because if this is her innie, again, probably she feels ashamed. And on top of that, she really wants to prove that she's nothing like this monster who has trapped her here. For the most part, they all look like they believed her, and everyone seemed to be buying her story except for Irving. And he clocked that she was lying, but then he was also lying. He didn't really want to talk about his experience, specifically this treasure chest of information his Audi has on Lumen. The most he's willing to say is to Dylan regarding his Audi's paintings. So in the season finale, we found out that Irving loves to paint, specifically elevators in the dark. In the last season, we noticed that Irving was starting to hallucinate, and it seems like the barrier between Irving's innie and Audi is starting to break. And during his conversation with Dylan, he says something along the lines of, "It's not our world up there." And he's so devastated. He just wants to pass. He wants this life to end so he can be with Bert's innie. And finding out that Bert was married just totally annihilated his soul. You get the sense that being on the outside really changed these innies. And we're not sure if it's for the better or worse yet, but they went up there and it just was not what they were expecting, and now they're jaded and sad, and they don't really know what to do with themselves. Now, Dylan is the only innie who was unable to surface, and therefore he is the weak link in the chain. After calming Irving down, he is summoned to Mr. Milchick's office. When he gets there, he's informed of his wife's name, as well as a new initiative by Lumen to bridge the gap between innies and outies by giving innies the opportunity to meet their loved ones. And Mr. Milchick is so smart. He is a diabolical genius. He knows that people are willing to work harder if they have someone they love or someone they deeply care about. He totally emotionally manipulates Dylan and convinces him that his outie's wife really wanted him to know her name. He then coerces Dylan into keeping it a secret for fear of ruining Lumen's plans, as if Dylan has way more to lose than the other innies. And for the time being, this will probably work, because Dylan finding out he had a son and then not really being able to see him or see what his life was like, he could become quite resentful. The episode ends and everybody is back in the office, and I thought this was such a cute scene, and they're just happy to be there. We don't really know what they do for a living. They don't even know what they do for a living. And I think we've all had jobs where it's just so mindless, but the homies are what makes it special. And so I just love the four of them together, because I think we've all had that experience with coworkers where you hate the job or you're just kind of clocking in, but just seeing that one person makes you smile. The scene ends with Mark seeing an image of Miss Casey. This time it's not the same image as in the photograph. He's seeing a different image of her. So it seems like Mark's outie is slowly starting to infiltrate his innie. And so I thought this was a fantastic first episode. The vibes were high. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.